cup of tea as we play the characters that you cheer. So join us as we go below the frame.
Welcome to Below the Frame. I am Matt Vogel, and today we are picking up part 2 of my discussion with Craig Shemin, who is a writer, who is a producer. He has been around in and out of the Muppet world for decades, and he has written some really great things over the years. He started out as an intern at the Jim Henson Company, and then moved from being an intern to working in PR, and then from working in PR to working as a writer. And he has done some, just like I said, he's just done some fantastic things, and he's a really great writer. He's a very funny person and a great guy as well. And so last time we talked about where he came from. We talked about those things like him being an intern, etc. And today we're going to pick it up talking about more of some of the projects that Craig worked on, and including MuppetFest and the Carnegie Hall shows that we did several years ago, and the New Zealand Jim Henson Retrospectacle. We talk about the Muppet Christmas Carol 30th anniversary panel that was at D23. And then, of course, we talk about Craig's book, Sam and Friends, the story of Jim Henson's first television show. So let's jump back into it with Craig Shemin. You've also done a lot of other things. You were in Florida at the Disney MGM Studios when it was called that, and you wrote on a show called Donna's Day.
Donna's Day, yes. It was a Henson production. It's sort of like Martha Stewart for kids, for families.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a woman named Donna Erickson. She had this show on PBS that showed how to make things out of everyday stuff, toys and activities and cooking stuff. And so they said, well, let's get Donna and we'll put that Swedish chef in it on some of the cooking segments. And then we did a special with Kermit later on. So I went and worked on that. And that was kind of fun, doing a show out of... they don't do them anymore. But
they don't. No, yeah. I worked at a show there at the MGM Studios at the time it was called Children's Television Workshop. The show was called Big Bag.
Big Bag, yeah.
Remember Big Bag?
Yeah,
and so I was helping Joey. I was right-handing for Joey, but that was so cool to be there at the park and be in a studio
sort of
and shooting
sneak out and go on rides.
Sneak right in, come back. We did that at lunch quite often.
Yeah.
That was so much fun. You've done so many cool things. Back in 2001, they had a thing called MuppetFest. I'm sure a lot of people know. But what was that, and what did you do?
Well, MuppetFest was essentially, it was the first ever major Muppet fan convention. It was produced by Creation, people who do a lot of Star Trek conventions. And we wanted to, so I was involved in helping to sort of plan out what the content was going to be. And then I ended up hosting one of the days. It was I hosted the second day. I think Kirk hosted the first day, because we wanted to sort of, a lot of other Creation stuff, they, had their hosts who were not really associated with anything. And we wanted to make sure that people knew that there were people running it who knew what was happening.
Yeah.
So it was, a couple of days. It was out at the Santa Monica Convention Center. And, we had performers.
There were panels. And
we had panels.
Artwork,
we had autographing sessions.
Oh, that's great.
And then one of the big elements of it was a live show.
Yes, a live Muppet show, was it not?
Yes, but it sort of started small and then grew.
Oh.
Originally, it was going to be a very small, intimate show. And I think it was going to be on the soundstage, because they had fairly recently bought the Chaplin studio. Because I remember we did our planning and rehearsals there. And it was going to be, it's just going to be a small little thing. Paul Williams going to come sing some songs. And then it's like, we're going to get Lionel Richie, who ended up not doing it. But we'll get some other guest stars. And it turned into a thing, and we rented a theater. And at a certain point, Jim Lewis and I were writing that show, and we're like, well, let's do it. Well, let's do the Muppet Show. We tell Martin Baker that, and the next thing he knows, he has the people who had done the sets for Muppets Tonight, they're painting a Muppet Show drop.
Oh.
And well, it's like, we'll we'll put a hole in it, and we can have Kermit putting out his head through the thing, and it'll be like, and it's like, wow. And they like building some set pieces, and it ended up getting out of hand, but in a wonderful way. And there was a break. It was a benefit for Save the Children. So there was like an auction in the middle of it. Some of the performers, I think it was Jerry and Dave and Steve and or Brian sat like before we started Act 2, and they just sort of sat on stage and talked about Jim a little bit. And
I love that.
And then the whole thing ended with a medley of Paul Williams doing a song. I remember it was the first time I met Paul. I met him for breakfast to talk about doing this. And I said to him, oh, and then it's going to end with you sitting at the piano, and Kermit will be sitting on the piano, and you guys, you'll play and you'll sing the songs, and we'll have, and he's like, oh, it's perfect except for one thing. I don't really play the piano. Oh. And it's like, I could have sworn I've seen you on TV playing the piano. You've seen me on TV pretending to play the piano. And I said, well, it's okay because the piano's going to be hollow because Kermit's going to be in it anyway.
Yeah. Continue to pretend. He'll pretend.
So
there.
it all worked out. And we had the other Ray Charles, who was the guy who was the music consultant for the Muppet Show. He conducted the orchestra. They got a little 6-piece orchestra to
live music
duplicate. Yeah. It was duplicating the instrumentation of the old Muppet Show band.
What a cool event that must have been for fans, and I hope for the performers too to get to everyone to kind of feel the love from the fans.
We had John Voight did a bit dressed in a chicken suit. He was filling in for one of Gonzo's chickens.
It's funny.
And we did a thing where Brooke Shields had to play Miss Piggy because here's the thing that people might be interested. This was the first time at MuppetFest, at the big event, and at the show, where Eric's Miss Piggy was seen by the fans in a big way. And we sort of sat around and were like, well, Frank's not going to do this, and Eric's been starting to work on it, but we didn't feel like we should sort of, hey, here, Eric, here's one of your first big things. You're going to do it in front of full view of every Muppet fan in the world.
Oh, my gosh.
So we went and pre-recorded 3 bits with him at Sesame. We took over Emilio's dressing room at Sesame and set up a camera and did 1 bit for each day of the daytime thing, and then a bit where, Kermit has Brooke Shields putting on a snout and a wig, and they're going to do a duet, and then the screen comes on with Miss Piggy putting a stop to everything. So we figured it's a way of getting Piggy into the show without having to really put Eric through torture.
Such a difficult task that would be. That sounds like a really fun event. I wish I would have been able to come out for that.
It's interesting because, we have, there's video that exists, but it's only video of the image magnification camera.
Oh, is it?
Yes, because that's what we were shooting. They brought in a crew to put, the show on video. Uh-huh. And, that's what they're doing. They're shooting what it's going to look like on TV.
Yeah.
So half the fun you don't really see.
That's true, because you would see beneath, and you would see below.
And they did some really fun effects where they did the wings. They built like these false wings. They made them scrims. So if you lit them from behind, you could see Kermit running the show. And if you lit them from the front, it would become the solid wall. Of course, it was all, Martin did an amazing job of willing sort of physical production to happen.
Yes.
And you'd ask him, can we do this? And he's like, oh, of course.
Well, I didn't get to do that, but there have been a couple of really cool things that I've gotten to do that you and I were both involved in that you wrote. You wrote the concerts that we did at Carnegie Hall and the Jim Henson Retrospectacle concert that we did in New Zealand.
Yes.
So let's talk about those things for a little bit.
On behalf of the Legacy, I was doing the Carnegie Hall concert, which started, I think, with the New York Pops.
John Tartaglia was the host, and you had Sesame Street and Muppets and Fraggle.
Yeah, and Emmett Otter's characters.
And Emmett Otter. The one thing I really remember about that event, which was first of all, it was at Carnegie Hall, and that was pretty cool. The other thing I remember about it, Jerry Nelson was there.
Yeah.
And it was kind of the last public appearance.
Yeah,
maybe,
when
that
we
he
were
had made.
we were planning it, and we were like, well, we need Jerry to be a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
And so Johnny and I called him and asked him if he would do the announcer. We record it, and he's like, oh yeah, absolutely. And so yeah, like great. So I call into the studio, and they patch me in, and I hear Jerry very, very faint.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's sort of like, sort of talking very quietly. And I start feeling really bad. It's like, I shouldn't be asking him to do this at the end of a big, long thing. And, fortunately, it was only like a couple of announcing things. It's like, okay, we're ready. You want to try? Let's rehearse it. And, this little feeble voice goes to, welcome to Jim Henson's musical world.
I knew you were going to say that just because I knew what he was saving it.
And he's like, because it's like, you want it to be the Muppet Show announcer, right? I'm like, yeah, exactly.
God, so
okay.
great.
So it was so special to have the show at Carnegie Hall start with that voice. And the fact that Jerry was able to be there, and and we had a whole lot of technical problems. So the first thing is like, I was seeing the show up there, that show, and I see Jerry coming out of the box, and first thing he says, I have a few notes. But yeah, it meant so much that he was there. I still get people coming up to me that were at the show, and they were lucky because we didn't say ahead of time what exactly was going to be in the show, because we really didn't know. We were just sort of like, we just were lucky that we kept on asking people, and people were saying yes.
It was a special, really special, magical, beautiful moment. And those don't really happen that often, where the characters from Sesame and Muppets and that was Fraggle and
and I had to, I'm doing the script and I'm sending it to the various departments. I send it to Henson, and it's like, well, we'll have our people look at it. And I'm like, I used to be your people. I used to be the person that you sent this to.
Right.
And the fact, and it was only allowed to happen because it was through the Jim Henson legacy. Because it was a way of connecting all of these things. And that's why, one of the very first things when we did the New Zealand show, I was going to format it like the Muppet, like we did with the Muppet Show live at MuppetFest.
Yeah.
And I got a big no. It's like,
it probably shouldn't be if you're going to have all these other characters. I guess would probably
basically
be the
they just
point of
said this has to be Jim Henson oriented, or it just doesn't work for us.
The beautiful thing about the Retrospectacle concert that we did in New Zealand with Brett McKenzie was that once again you had characters from the Muppets and Sesame and Fraggle and this beautiful suite from the Dark Crystal that was just that we saw images of the film up there. It was just
I edited that together.
Oh, it was so beautiful, and it fit with the music really just beautifully. And the people there in New Zealand were incredible.
Well, and that's what was it was another situation where Brett and I were talking about this, and we're like, how much do we want to tell? It was a delicate problem, because you want to tell people enough so they're like, oh, I need to go see this. But you don't want to tell them so much that you're going to be spoiling the surprise.
Right.
So it's like, when Big Bird, when you come out as Big Bird, there's you could feel a chill.
Yeah,
that went over for that audience. If we had gone out and say, hey, come see Big Bird,
right?
You don't get that moment.
No.
And the thing that's amazing to me, and this is a tribute to you guys, is we only had 5 main Muppet performers in this concert. We picked up 2 local people. Mm-hmm. And Dave sat in the audience.
Yes, he did.
And enjoyed it, because he never gets to sit in the audience.
That's what he said. He's like, I never get to watch these things.
And when you watch it, and there is like archival video of this concert, when you watch it, it's astonishing, because there's no way that this is 5 people, because right. you guys double so many characters, and that was one of the big challenges in writing this show. It's
Yes.
not just about writing the sketches and figuring out what goes where, but you got to incorporate time for you to get out a Big Bird.
Yeah, so we started as with Kermit.
Mm-hmm.
And then after Kermit did his thing, I ran around, I exited stage left, and I had to run all the way around the back of the theater, throw on the Big Bird pants. And then there was like a decent window in case something went wrong, because I had to get mic'd up, got to get my monitor on, everything. And then boom, I'm Big Bird.
Yeah.
and
that was like, it's like, so everything is sort of this house of cards.
Yes.
Where, these decisions, some of them I would not have made in terms of what song is going where. And sometimes Brett would say, hey, can we move this song to this? And I'd look and I'm like, no, we can't. And I'd say, listen, we need, because Peter can't do this and he's got to go over there.
Right.
And when we did the Carnegie Hall show, we wanted the Sesame Street characters to come back to do Rainbow Connection at the end. And Disney politely said, no. So in New Zealand, if we end with a Sesame song, we end with a Muppet song, the other characters, we don't want to intermingle. So there's still a little bit of this sort of thing, but it's like you do that New Zealand folk song, you can mix the character.
Everybody can come out and enjoy that moment, and it becomes, honoring where you are.
Yeah, and the audience just loved it. They all stood up and they sang. I mean, I remember standing backstage and seeing these little kids in the front row, just sort of with their elbows up on the stage, just totally entranced. Yeah. It was one of the most magical shows that I had been a part of. It was an amazing, amazing thing. And I remember between concerts, I went to lunch with Brett and his family. And we were walking, and all of these people were stopping Brett to tell him how magical an experience they had just had.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there were some big things that happened just that was big to us, like the fact that Disney and Sesame allowed Kermit and Ernie to sit next to each other at the press conference.
Yep.
And something that couldn't really have happened because of the former performer lineup.
Another thing that was so much fun in New Zealand. We've gotten to do a lot of great things. We did also. It was for the 30th anniversary of Muppet Christmas Carol.
And that was something that D23 people, Muppet people didn't, but the D23 people approached me. But I wrote the script for the prepared material with Jim, because it was one of his last things before he was retiring. So I loved getting to work with him on doing that again. So we had a great time doing that. Yeah, so it came out so beautifally.
Really did. And you can see, I think there's highlights of it on
there are a lot of
on YouTube.
There are a lot of snippets of it out there. And did the little panel at the beginning. And then we closed with that musical moment. And when you guys came out in front of the stage, it worked out so well. Because once I saw that stage happened like that, it's like, that's going to be so much easier for the guys to do. And it'll be great for the audience to see
magic moment
in progress. Yeah. And we were in one of the small rooms. It's like only 3,800 people. And we got one of the highest ratings of they do all these
a lot of exit surveys. We're going to talk now about this book that you have written.
What a wonderful segue.
Well, I tried. It was a little clunky, but that's okay. It's all about Jim Henson's first TV show. It's called Sam and Friends. The story of Jim Henson's first TV show. And it's how did it come about? I had been a fan of the concept of Sam and Friends ever since I was an intern, because I would go and watch the surviving kinescopes. There was a second floor conference room at 117 at the old townhouse. And there were all these 3/4-inch tapes. So at lunchtime, sometimes I'd take a tape off the wall. And there are only a handful of these episodes. So I loved knowing that Jim was in college when he was doing this. And I was in college. This is an amazing thing. It's one of the reasons I love that story, because it's very inspiring to young artists. Attention, young artists out there. The whole idea that Jim was doing this when it was so hard to do. Nowadays, everybody has a television studio in their pocket. At that point, Jim was able to do an enormous amount in a time when you had to,
know somebody with a television station
that happened to have a slot
job
available to do a show.
Yeah. So years later, I started thinking about, what would it be like? How could you tell this story? And I found, and I tell the story in the book, when I was working in the public relations department, I found when we had to sort of sort out a list of boxes that said old production files. And in one of these was a file folder of old Sam and Friends scripts. And another folder was the Rolf sketches, the original designs. Another folder was the Sesame Street counting film storyboards. Wow. And it was an amazing amount of stuff. And then, so I took that in the back of my head. And about 8 years ago or so, maybe a little bit more, the Henson Archives found about 44, 45 reel-to-reel tapes. And Jim had started recording the audio of Sam and Friends from about 1958. And these tapes still existed. And they were just sort of sitting in storage, but I knew that they existed. And I said, okay, there are scripts, there are tapes. And when we finally had them transferred, it was more than 400 episodes of audio tapes.
But there's not necessarily video of everything, right?
No. In order to record a show back then, you had to do what was called a kinescope, which was basically aiming a 16 millimeter film camera at the TV tube. And it was expensive. So it would only be done on special occasions. So if you look at some of the ones that Jim saved, it was, it's visual thinking because it has the animation on top and it's a really unique and special thing. So Jim's going to record it. And then he saved a few shows by filming them in color at another studio. But they're only about 15 Sam and Friends episodes. So I thought, well, maybe with all of this other stuff, with the audio and with the scripts, there's a way to cobble together a book. And I had done 3 interviews with Jane Henson on audio for, just for the heck of it. It wasn't a specific project. So I knew I had Jane talking about Sam and Friends. So I reached out to Karen Falk, a wonderful Henson archivist, without whom this project would not be possible. And we approached Lisa Henson with it. And her first response was, is there enough for a book? And Karen and I were both like, yeah, I think there's enough for a book. And Lisa and the whole Henson family was just incredibly kind and generous. And they allowed me to do it without, I could use the characters gratis. They didn't charge me for the use of the photos. The only thing I had to do, I had to pay to have those tapes transferred, which was well worth the money.
Absolutely.
They have been incredibly generous, and Karen just made all of the archives open to me. And it was very tough because the key research period of this book coincided with the COVID lockdown. So I was getting I had started doing the research by going to the Henson shop, and then it was like Karen having a lot of stuff scanned and sent to me. I had just started doing a lot of the work, and then I had a quadruple bypass operation. I had actually just reached out to Frank to ask him to write the foreword, and he had said yes. And shortly after that, I'm writing to him and say, don't take your time on the foreword. I'm going to be having quadruple bypass surgery, and then he calls me right away. It's like, are you okay? And very sweet guy to do that. And but it was weird because I was about the same age as Jim was when he passed away. Yeah. And I'm like, but one of the things that I think helped my recovery is that I really felt I needed to tell the story.
And it's great that the book focuses on the beginning of Jim's career. When he was still a student in college and where he met Jane at a puppetry class. And so can you, talk a little bit about Jim and how he got his start?
Yeah. He did not necessarily want to be a puppeteer.
Right.
In fact, I remember in the Henson's Place documentary, He says, I don't think anyone would really decide to become a puppeteer.
Yeah.
Of course, crushing the spirits of all of
Not
you
until
folks,
him, maybe. Not until he came along. Maybe that's true.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's sort of like the way he felt about himself. He didn't consider himself to be, I mean, he considered himself to be a puppeteer, but much more. He was, he primarily was a storyteller and a character creator. But he did puppetry just strictly as a means to break into television. There was a station that wanted to do a kids version of the CBS morning show that was happening during the week. So there's a local version of it, and they're like, oh, it's going to be fun. Instead of Walter Cronkite doing the news, we'll have a kid doing the news. And they said, well, there is this new law that allows kids to work in entertainment without being, more than, up at that point, you had to be 14 to get working papers. But you could be less than 14 and blah, blah, blah. We could do this. So they planned this whole show. And Jim was well over 14, but he had auditioned and they liked him. He had a friend named Russell. And so they got the gig doing this junior morning show. And the junior morning show, after 3 weeks, they get in trouble because the law that they said, hey, it's going to be great. It only applied to live theatrical performances like plays and things. So they had like half of their people or most of their cast was under 14.
Uh-oh.
So they canceled the show after 3 weeks. But the guy at the station said, well, this guy, Jim Henson, he's good. He's good. So he calls WRC, another station in the market, and says, there's this guy, does puppets. Maybe you have something for him. So he goes over to WRC. He starts doing stuff there. And that eventually leads into getting their own show. And that's, and that, all of that junior morning show happened when Jim was in high school. And then he goes in the University of Maryland and he goes into this puppetry class as a freshman and he meets a senior named Jane Nebel. And he ends up asking her to work on the show, on the stuff he was doing at WRC because Russell, his former partner, had gone off and graduated and gone to college someplace else. So that's when they started working, but just as, collaborators. And then eventually that grew into something more.
Also in the book, we are not only introduced to Jim and Jane, but also to Jerry Jewell and Frank Oz. And what I did not realize was that Jerry worked as a puppeteer. Jerry Jewell worked as a puppeteer during summer breaks from college. Mm-hmm. And the summer he graduated from college, Jerry's assistant was Frank. What? I did not know that.
Yeah.
I did not know that they knew
Frank.
each other. I just assumed that it was Jim who had brought everybody together. But it almost seems like, it seems that Jerry Jewell brought Frank to Jim, really.
Well, yeah. I think that when Jim saw Frank and Jerry perform together, and I think he really wanted, Frank was more of an artist when it comes to puppetry. And Jim wanted to have Frank come out and work with him. But Frank was still in high school. So it's like, take the next best thing, which is Jerry. So he took Jerry because, it's like we need someone else. Jane had started having children. So, and Bob Payne was another guy who was working there, but he wasn't primarily a puppeteer. He was an artist. And he was still working, and he stayed he came back and worked with Jim on Sesame Street and Muppet Show and Dark Crystal. So, but he's like, we have Sam and Friends going, we have all this stuff. Let's bring Jerry Jewell. We'll give him a job. And as soon as he gets to Washington, Sam and Friends gets canceled. So he only works on the last 13 weeks of Sam and Friends. But he has all this stuff happening. And then after the run of Sam and Friends, they move to New York, and that's when they bring out Frank, who by then had graduated and had gone to college for a couple of semesters. Frank was planning to be a journalist. And because he was, his family were puppeteers, and I think he wanted to get far away from that.
Yeah. He did not.
Didn't manage.
No, he did not.
He didn't manage to do that.
Well, and also just something about the book. It's a great book. Like it's filled with scripts. It's like it's just filled with
Thank you.
chock full of.
And in fact, I've just finished a manuscript on the Sam and Friends script book, which will be coming out soon. So there were 5 scripts in the first book, and then there are going to be those scripts plus about, it'll be a total of about 60 scripts in this script book, and it'll be all annotated with historical notes so you can understand the jokes. And
that's great.
They'll be all nicely, you'll be able to read it, and there'll be also some of Jim's really cool handwriting and some of the drafts.
That's great.
And all, again, thanks to the Henson family and the Henson Company, because, they want this material to be out there. And you don't, it's not a big moneymaker to do a book or 2 books about a show that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I guess that's probably true.
So the people that have bought the book and read the book have responded so positively to it. And I'm really, really proud. And part of the reason is that it's also Jane's story. And she has gotten left out of it quite a lot. And sometimes due to her own efforts, she felt, I think, that she wanted it to be Jim's story. And she sort of stepped away. And I remember talking to her about it. And she would say, well, I tried to get her to sort of acknowledge the role that she had. And she's like, I was just helping. But no, she, and eventually she confessed, I guess out of every 3 puppets, I made one of them or something, And so it's not like she wasn't involved in this. And we found some photos fairly recently. Del Ankers, who shot all those Wilkins coffee commercials, his wife found a stack of pictures and sent them to the Henson archives.
Wow.
And there were a lot of pictures, and you look at the Wilkins commercials, Jane was usually performing the Wilkins character. And there's a lot of stuff going on. You see them in these photos where she's actually manipulating the puppets, and you don't think about it. You think, it's Jim doing everything.
Right, because the voices are primarily Jim in those. Right. And
they pre-recorded all of the voices at that point in time.
Yeah. Your book is dedicated not only to your wife, Stephanie, but to Jane as well. And there's a very nice dedication in the front that you say about her. But tell me something that maybe isn't in the book and that maybe that we didn't learn something about her.
I think that, it's hard to convey. And I mention it a little bit in the book, but she was a very, very funny person. She had a terrific sense of humor, but it was fairly dry. So it didn't really she didn't come off as being a particularly funny person, but she was very funny, and she loved to sort of do that, be funny in a playful way. And I remember we were having her record some voiceover and a little intro for a video. And I thought it would be helpful to have a teleprompter come in and to write up the script for her. Now, Jane always liked to just sort of talk off the cuff, but we had to have, and it's like, it should be this amount of, it should be this many minutes, and, we don't want to leave out anything. So I wrote up a script and put it on the teleprompter, and she was sort of bristling at that. So the teleprompter operator didn't really know Jane. And so we started rehearsing, and Jane is just being awful with the teleprompter. He's like, "Hi, my name is Jane Henson. Believe it or not," looks back, "this is me in that picture." And you could tell the teleprompter guy's like, this is going to be a long day. So Jane's just like, "I'm going to talk to you about the beginning of the Is that okay, Craig?" And, and she did it just, to have fun.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of stuff that she would do. And, once she got a laugh out of it, then she was wonderful. And she showed that she can read a teleprompter.
Yeah, she can do it.
But so, I mean, I think a lot of people don't think of her as being funny because when you see her, she's not interviewed a lot, but when you saw her at events, she was sort of presented as the grande dame of the Muppets. And here's Jane Henson accepting this on behalf of Jim. But she had a really sly sense of humor. And when they were dedicating the statue of Jim at University of Maryland, it's a beautiful, beautiful statue. If you're near Maryland, go out and check it out. It was located in front of the student center where Jim used to do silk screens and all this stuff. And it was named for Adele Stamp, who was the dean of women at the University of Maryland. And there's a big sign, the Adele Stamp Student Union. No. And Jane was doing her speech, and she just said, it's so great to be in front of the Adele Stamp Student Union with the statue. And she looked up and she's like, I knew her before she was a building.
That's funny. That's great.
So, yeah, I guess that's what people I wish knew more about Jane.
It's funny. Yeah. A few years ago, I went back to Kansas City, which is where I'm from. I visited the Children's Theater.
I hear everything's up to date there.
It is everything, except in this instance. But I grew up at this Children's Theater there in Kansas City, and I dropped in, this is a few years back, and I dropped in on a class and talked to the kids, a theater class. There were maybe 20 kids in the class, and I want to say that they were maybe fourth graders, I think. And I asked them, I kind of said who I was and that I was one of the Muppet performers, and I asked them if any of them had heard of Jim Henson. And I think only like one had ever heard of Jim at that time, and it just gutted me.
Part of it comes from the way the characters have sort of been split up, from a business perspective. Disney is really not allowed to use Jim's name in connection with the Muppets.
Right.
Sesame Street, I think, is limited. I think they can credit them as the Jim Henson Sesame Street Muppets, but I'm not sure if they do anymore. And that's one of the reasons the Jim Henson legacy exists, to try and make sure that his name is still connected with these things. So we try and do that with the museum exhibits. And I know the company tries to do it also. And that's one of the reasons the new documentary is so important. Because
and your book too.
Yeah.
I think your book as well. I think those are all vital pieces of the puzzle to who Jim Henson was.
And that was, Jane was very, very prescient that there would be a need for the Jim Henson legacy and for things like this, because she knew that the characters would live on, because the people who owned those characters, as long as, they could use them and financially benefit from them, the characters would continue to live. And, she was more concerned that Jim's name not be forgotten. And that's why she started the organization.
Yeah.
And why we try and do the screenings and exhibits and things like that. But,
I'm so happy that the legacy exists. I'm so happy that you exist to be able to tell Jim's story from when he was starting out. And I want to say that you are a key part of Jim's story continuing, because the efforts that you have made in continuing Kermit in a way that is consistent with Jim's performance does not go unnoticed by me. Wow. I think that it's a challenging thing, and I know that you've done an episode about the inheriting of performers, inheriting characters, but I can't say enough that these characters endure with the help of wonderful performers who continue them through generations, and you do a very very hard job, but you do an excellent job of keeping that alive. Thanks, Craig. I appreciate that. Thank you. And Craig, thank you so much for joining me today on Below the Frame. I'm so glad to know you.
Oh, hey, are we done?
I think we are. I just wanted to thank you.
And that's the end of part 1.
I'm so glad that you have this wealth of knowledge that you can share with not only me, but for people that could be inspired by Jim's story or by your story as a writer. If you don't have the books or the book, one book right now, but there will be a second book, please go out and get those books. Not you, Craig. I assume you've got the book.
I've gotten the books, but I want to emphasize that you can get it anywhere pretty much where you can buy books online. You're not going to see it in the stores
not at a
very
physical
much because
store.
of the way. Yeah, a few carry them, but it's, you can get them on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and you can probably order it through your independent bookstore if you want to patronize them.
Which is great. Great way to support
And
local
also,
businesses.
I want to say that if you buy the book and you can visit samandfriendsbook.com, and I will send you an autographed book plate and a bookmark and all sorts of fun stuff for free if you send me a picture of yourself with the book or other proof that you own
great.
it. Yeah,
That's great.
I'm happy to do that.
Well, Craig, thank you so much for joining me. Wish you all the best. And say hi to Stephanie for me.
I will.
Thanks, Craig.
Thank you, Matt.
Below the Frame is a Welcome Matt production produced by me, Matt Vogel. The theme song was written by Stephanie DeBruzzo and myself and performed by my band, The Mighty Weaklings. Thanks to Dave Holteen at DaveHolteenDesign.com. He created our podcast art. You can follow me on Instagram at WelcomeMattV or search Matt Vogel. I post things every now and again, and it'll help you know when new episodes of this podcast, for example, are coming out. If you are sharing podcasts, please let somebody know about this one. And also, if you have a few seconds, just rate and review this one. I'm sure that pleases the podcast gods or something. You can find Below the Frame wherever you get your podcasts, and we are now a video podcast on YouTube, so you can see our faces if that's something that you want to do. Thanks everybody out there for listening. I am Matt Vogel, and we will see you next time when we go Below the Frame.
Go, go, go.